A massive bear stands motionless in the fading light, its amber eyes locked onto hers. For weeks, it's followed her home, never getting closer, never retreating. Now, Emma stands on the edge of a decision she never expected to make, a decision that will unravel the truth of her past. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The first time Emma locked eyes with the bear, it wasn't fear she felt, it was recognition. A strange, spine-deep certainty that this creature knew her, not just as another human in the woods, but her. The way it held her gaze from the tree line, unmoving, unblinking, stirred something old in her, something ancestral. She stood still, halfway down the gravel road that split the dense forest like a scar, her tote bag hanging limp at her side, forgotten. The bear, half shadow and half flesh in the golden spill of dusk, tilted its head slightly, almost quizzically, before vanishing back into the green. From then on, the pattern deepened. Every evening without fail, the same lumbering form would emerge just as Emma passed the twisted cedar stump near Old Mill Creek. He never made a sound beyond the natural rustle of his passage. No snarl, no charge. Just presence. A heavy, undeniable presence, padded on silence and the scent of wet pine. He never ventured closer than 50 feet, never made any gesture of aggression. But the gaze remained, not wild, not curious, intimate, as if he were remembering her. Emma stopped telling people. Her coworkers had already exchanged enough raised eyebrows. Even her neighbor, Mr. Halverson, a retired trapper with stories stitched into every wrinkle, had given her the polite smile reserved for the mentally unraveling. "Bears don't follow folks like that, hun," he'd said. "They sniff, they rummage, then they move on. Don't take it personal." But Emma had taken it personal. She began to walk more slowly, testing him. He matched her pace. Once, she cut through the side trail that looped past the marsh. He didn't appear. The next day, back on her usual route, there he was again, rising like smoke from the trees, as if anchored to that path and that time. The ritual was exact, like clockwork or grief. One evening, driven by a sharp pull of something she couldn't name, Emma stopped halfway down the trail and turned fully to face him. The bear froze. For a moment, they stood locked in the long silence of the woods, dusk bleeding across the ground between them. His eyes were dark and wet, and they held a weight she hadn't expected. Not the eyes of a wild thing. Not entirely. There was something mournful there. Familiar. She whispered into the trees, not expecting a response. "Why me?" The bear didn't move, didn't blink, but something in the stillness answered anyway. The photo rattled through Emma's mind like a hammer against bone. Her mother's face, pale, worn from the years of care and grief, holding the tiny bear cub with tenderness that was too personal, too intimate for a stranger's glance. The little cub's eyes were wide, trusting, and the connection between them was unmistakable. Emma knew those eyes, knew the way her mother had loved, even in silence, even when the world pressed in too hard around her. For B, the tag on the stuffed bear fluttered in the corners of Emma's mind, like a whisper trying to push through the noise. She could see it now, how her mother had always kept it close, that soft, frayed object that Emma had once held when she was too young to understand why it smelled like old memories and forgotten promises. She reached for the phone, fingers trembling. Rick Matheson's voice came through, clipped but kind, as he explained how attachment behavior in animals, especially ones raised in captivity, could warp a creature's instincts. But the problem with this particular case, Emma's mother's involvement, was far more complex. No one had anticipated the bear would remember. No one had prepared Emma for the idea that this wasn't some random animal wandering the woods, but something far more deliberate, far more connected to her past. The bear wasn't just following her, it was waiting for her, as if guided by some unseen tether. And that was the question that gnawed at Emma's insides. Why? Why would her mother have ever brought the bear into her life in the first place? She'd known about the wild animals her mother rescued, but this one, this particular bear, had slipped through the cracks of Emma's memory. There were no stories, no explanations, only the silent accumulation of objects left behind: a stuffed animal, a small photograph, and a trail of broken promises. The more Emma dug, the colder her skin became. The connection between the bear and her mother was undeniable, but the implications were terrifying. If this bear remembered, if it had been imprinted on her mother's love and care, then what did that mean for Emma? Was this some extension of her mother's own haunting, a ripple in the past that had reached out to her with sharp claws, demanding recognition? She turned the photo over in her hands again, studying the worn edges, the faded ink. It was undeniable. This was the same bear, the same eyes that had stared at her from the trees, watching her with a knowing gaze. She could feel it now, the weight of the bond between them, stretching back in time like a thread that had never truly broken. She felt the pull of something old, something unfinished. Emma wasn't just a bystander in this strange story. She was at the center of it. And if she was going to understand the bear, she would have to understand her mother's past first. The revelation hung in the air like a thick fog, suffocating the space between Emma and Rick. The words he was supposed to be euthanized echoed in her mind, reverberating with the weight of a history she had never fully understood. Emma's pulse thundered in her ears as she took in the implications. Her mother's fight, her mother's secret, the unseen life that had been lived in the shadows. She felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her, tilting her into a world that was somehow both familiar and entirely foreign. Bruno. The name twisted in her chest like a knife. Bruno. A name so simple, so small, but now suffused with a depth of meaning she hadn't known she could feel for an animal. Her mother's attachment to him hadn't been some passing whim or fleeting tenderness. It had been a bond forged in defiance. She had stood between the world and the bear, had chosen to protect him, to shelter him from the cold finality of a system that saw him as little more than a wild animal that needed to be erased. And Emma, for all her careful ignorance, had never realized the depth of that decision. Her mother hadn't been just an animal rescuer, as Emma had thought. No, her mother had been a keeper in the truest sense. She hadn't simply cared for Bruno. She had fought for him. She had made her own rules. And when the world had told her to let go, to turn away, she had refused. The bear had been her family, a family that had been hidden away in the dark corners of their secluded home, nestled among the trees where no one would see the lengths her mother had gone to preserve this delicate, fragile life. Now Emma understood why Bruno was here, why the bear who had once been a cub, a lost thing wandering through the trauma of human intervention, had reappeared at her doorstep. It was not just a matter of animal instinct or hunger. It was something far more primal, something that burrowed deep into the marrow of her bones. Bruno was not lost. He was searching for the only person left who had a claim to the care, the love her mother had poured into him all those years ago. And Emma, who had never wanted to know the truth, was now faced with it. She couldn't deny it. Not now. The scent of the woods, the weight of the bear's gaze, the memory of the stuffed animal with its faded tag, everything fell into place with a slow, undeniable certainty. Bruno had remembered her mother's scent. He had come back, not just to her, but for her. Her mother had known this would happen. She had known that one day the bear would return. Had she left this for Emma to face? Had she known the struggle that would rise up in Emma's chest at the sight of the bear, the rage that would burn like fire against the injustice of it all? Emma gripped the edge of the table, her fingers white, trembling. What should I do? The question felt foreign, like a confession that didn't belong to her. But it did. It was her question now. Rick didn't meet her eyes as he spoke, his voice quieter this time. You have to choose, Emma, whether you'll be his family like your mother was, or whether you'll let him go. The weight of that choice pressed down on her, heavy and unyielding. She could feel the pull of it, the weight of the animal in the woods, waiting, waiting for her. The decision had been made. The weight of it was final, but not oppressive. There was a strange calm in Emma's chest as she stood at the edge of the meadow, watching Bruno approach. The soft rustle of wind through the tall grass was the only sound that filled the air between them. He moved cautiously, as though unsure whether this moment was the beginning of something else or merely the closing of a chapter. For weeks she had waited for this moment to come. She had expected it to be filled with doubt, to be tangled with uncertainty, but instead a quiet knowing seeped into her bones. She had chosen to let him go, and in doing so had finally let herself heal. Bruno's hulking form stood before her now, his fur thick and rich in the dying light of the afternoon. The distance between them had shortened over the weeks. The invisible line of separation, once as insurmountable as a mountain, now felt like a thin thread drawn taut between them. It was in this moment, as he finally stepped closer to the wire, that Emma saw it clearly. He was no longer the lost cub, the stray she had found wandering at the edge of a painful past. He was his own being now. He was whole, and so was she. She reached out a hand slowly, her fingers brushing the cold metal of the fence. He nudged it with the softness of a giant. The touch was brief, fleeting, but it sent a jolt through her. A promise, unspoken but deep, of understanding, of peace. In the weeks that followed, Emma made the drive to the sanctuary, each trip a quiet pilgrimage to a place where Bruno had found a semblance of freedom. The sanctuary was tucked into the folds of a distant valley, surrounded by trees that felt as ancient as the mountains themselves. It was a place where the wild could truly roam. No fences, no restrictions, just the space to live without fear. Each time Emma arrived, Bruno would appear at the edge of his enclosure, his gaze locked on hers, as if he were waiting for her to make the first move, to acknowledge the bond they shared. She never thought it would end like this, so quietly, so simply. One day, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the meadow, Bruno came to her as he always did. But today, he didn't stop at the edge of the fence. He pressed his massive body against it, his fur brushing against her skin, warm and solid. He stayed there, unmoving, his breath steady and calm. Emma stayed with him, her hand resting gently on the fence, letting the silence speak the words neither of them could voice. That day, Bruno didn't walk away, and Emma didn't urge him to. She stayed, her heart steadying in a way she hadn't known was possible. The hours passed, slow and unhurried, until the sanctuary staff gently called for her to leave. She did, but not before one final look at the bear who had grown alongside her, the bear who had been a part of her mother's love and now was a part of her own healing. When she got the call weeks later, the news wasn't a shock. Bruno had passed quietly in his sleep, his heart having finally given out, a defect he'd carried since birth, hidden away in the depths of his giant frame. Emma had never imagined the day would come so soon, but when it did, she didn't feel the sting of loss so much as the warmth of a memory that lived on. Bruno had been a bridge between the past and the future, a legacy that tied her to a mother she could no longer touch, but could still feel in the quiet corners of her life. The grief was still there, lingering in the spaces between breaths, but it wasn't the same as before. Emma had given him what he needed most, freedom, and in doing so, she had freed herself too. Her mother had left her more than just a house. She had left her a legacy, one rooted in the deep, enduring love of a bear who had wandered through the forest, searching for a place to belong.